Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always a pleasure, Minister Wilkinson, to come back to our committee. There was a lot of disappointment coming out of COP27, and many of the environmental representatives were there, came out saying that they believe that the 1.5 degree threshold is now on life support. Would that be the position of your government?
No, it would not be the position of our government. I think that there's been enormous progress made over the course of the past few years. This COP was largely an implementation COP, so I don't think there was a huge expectation of ratcheting up a lot of the targets, but I think, there was a huge move in Glasgow, and we expect that to continue going forward.
November 11th, your colleague, Minister Guilbeault, stated that if every country did their part, he hoped that heating would be limited to between 1.7 and 2.4 degrees. So was Mr. Guilbeault talking off on his own? Because that would represent at 1.7, 1.8, that represents irreversible impact to the planet. So why did he make that statement?
Well, I think he's speaking to the state of play. At Glasgow, you saw the number come down from somewhere between 2.8 and 3 down to somewhere in the mid twos or a little bit below. I think at this COP, what they said is they saw a movement from 2.1 to 2. That's not 1.5, but that's still some modest progress. And of course, we all have to be looking to raise our level of ambition as we move forward.
Okay. I mean, I guess the question is, the concern for people is that modest progress isn't good enough right now, given the fact that if we go past 1.5, we are seeing potentially, well, we're already starting to see catastrophic impacts on communities and the planet. So I want to switch to a report that was produced by the Global Carbon Project that found that Canada was the only country in the G7 where methane and nitrous oxide emissions have risen. Have you compared what your department has with the fact that what the Europeans are saying is that our methane emissions have gone up rather than down?
Well, I would say a couple things. I mean, there are various sources of emissions in the economy of methane emissions. We've signed on to the Global Methane Pledge alongside a range of different countries that have a target for reducing methane across the economy. The primary focus for Canada has been on reducing methane from the oil and gas sector as the first step. Obviously, agriculture is more difficult. And we have made enormous progress. Both Alberta and Saskatchewan have actually basically achieved their 2025 targets already. But we need to continue to do more. Municipalities have to cap their landfills. We need to find different solutions for agriculture, et cetera. And we need to continue to push that because methane is critically important.
Killer, and we've put out $675 million, and yet we're the only country in the G7 where methane continues to rise. I would say that's a serious failure on the part of the government. I would also.
It's not in the oil and gas sector because we actually have seen significant reductions there. But of course, methane monitoring is getting better, and we are finding that methane across the world is actually a bigger challenge than many people thought.
It's a bigger challenge.
We're getting better at actually tracking it through satellites.
Better at reducing it because it keeps going up. But I'd like to switch tack. The European Emissions Database for Global Atmospheric Research said that the one hope for keeping it 1.5 is the fact that 24 countries saw significant economic growth between 2012 and 2021 and still cut their emissions, but Canada was not among them. This past year, emissions went up again after the dip during the pandemic. So how are we going to drop to 40 to 45% at 2030 if emissions are going back up again?
Well, emissions have gone down for 2 years in a row as the economy grew. But I would say to you that we need to continue to follow the plan that has been laid out. Canada has perhaps the most detailed climate plan that exists in the world that actually shows how we hit 2030 and how we put ourselves on a track to net zero by 2050. And we need to continue to implement. It's not just good enough to say you have a nice target. You've got to actually be able to implement and have a strategy as to how you're going to do it.
Absolutely agree with you. Our problem is we missed every single target we promised. We are the only country in the G7 that continues to miss. Emissions grew 3% last year after the COVID drop. So that is very concerning. And our Environment Commissioner, Jerry DeMarco, says that we are now the outlier in the G7. So it's not enough, I agree with you, to have nice targets. We have to meet them. But I want to switch tactics in my final 2 minutes. I was in Germany recently meeting with various officials about their energy crisis, and they sent a very clear message to us. They said if Canada can't supply LNG within 2 years, they're not interested in signing long-term contracts. They are interested in whether or not Canada has the potential to supply Germany's manufacturing sector with hydrogen. Has your department looked into the ability of Canada to supply hydrogen to Germany in the next 2 to 3 years?
The answer is yes. There is enormous work going on the East Coast associated with building out wind, both onshore and offshore, for the purpose of actually producing hydrogen and shipping it to Germany. There's also significant work going on in Western Canada with respect to the production of hydrogen from natural gas. Big investment with Air Products just a couple of weeks ago on one of the largest hydrogen facilities that's been built. We have an agreement with Germany under which we're looking to start shipping hydrogen from the East Coast by 2025. I totally agree with you. Germany is looking to accelerate the transition, and Canada wants to be part of that.
Interesting, because they say that the push in Europe is so strong now, according to the International Energy Agency, that we're actually going to hit peak oil in 2025, not 2030, because the push largely through the German economy to switch to hydrogen changes everything. So would you think that it would be reasonable for Canada to reassess its modeling based on what the Canada's energy regulator has, that we are going to continue to increase massive exports of oil over the next 10, 15 years, when the International Energy Agency is saying we're hitting peak oil quicker, and that there's going to start to be a major switch over to other energy sources, particularly hydrogen?
Well, certainly, Mr. Angus, I agree with you that they are looking to accelerate the shift towards hydrogen. Although, as somebody who used to be in the hydrogen business, I think it's not as simple as being able to flip a switch. And so it will be a transition that will happen over time. But yes, the Canadian Energy Regulator has been asked by me to do a 1.5 degree scenario. We have been asked them to work closely with the International Energy Agency, because that is the international body with the expertise with respect to energy issues. And you will see that coming forward over the course of the coming year.
Thank you. And then just in my final seconds, the issue of the roundtables, we're hearing from Labour that if we're talking to just transition, they want to be at the tables. They don't want to be at their own separate table. Is the government committed to a tripartite approach to make sure that Labour is sitting at each of the regional roundtables in a position to make decisions and not just be consulted?
So these tables are not federal. They are federal provincial mechanisms to engage conversations about economic opportunity going forward, and about the electricity grid and how we actually ensure we have a grid that can support the electrification of many things. There will be differences between different provinces and territories reflecting different provincial perspectives, but I would say that one of the things that the federal government is insisting on is that there is appropriate engagement with Indigenous peoples as well as with labor and industry.
Okay, we need to stop there. So now we'll go into the second round, and that's going to